Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to join us for our session this morning, both in person and online. My name's Ellen. I work here as the Haematology Oncology Physio across the road at St Vincent's, and I'm part of the supportive care group who are responsible for putting on these education sessions over the last 18 months. To start off, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So just starting with some housekeeping for those of us here in the room. Toilets just out the corridor and to the left. For anyone who didn't see, there's tea, coffee and some refreshments out there as well. For those people who are joining us online, we just ask that you stay muted just to help with sound. But if you do have any questions, to pop them in the chat. We have got someone online monitoring that as well. In the event of a fire, for those who are joining us here, we will just head down the stairs and out the front and across the road to Green Park is our evacuation point. And obviously for anyone who's here in the room, we welcome questions. We will have time for question and answers at the end, but we just ask that you raise your hand so we can bring a microphone to you, just so that the people online can also hear. As many of you know, we have been running these sessions since September of last year, and we really hope that these sessions, we're offering them so that people can get some education and feel empowered about their own care. So certainly spread the word. We have got plans to continue them into 2025, so they'll be running quarterly in 2025, and the next session will be scheduled already for February 12th, 2025 at 10 a.m. here in this room. So if you want to pop that in your diary and share with anyone that you know, and there'll be some information about that at the end of the session as well. In terms of a disclaimer, all the sessions that we present here, if anyone's attended before or are new here, it is general advice only. We get a lot of people from various backgrounds, various stages of cancer. So all of this information that we aim to provide is general advice. So we encourage that if there's anything specific, please to speak to your cancer care team or to your GP. Leah will do her best to answer questions as she can, but certainly it is general for everyone. We also have an evaluation, so there will be a QR code up on the screen at the end of the talk, and we'll pop it in the chat as well. We really value any feedback that you have about our presentations, about anything that you want to see in future presentations, and how we can continue to improve this and provide the sessions that you want to see. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this morning. So Leah Curran is a clinical psychologist who has been working in cancer services since 2008, initially at RPA before moving here to St Vincent's in 2011. Her main clinical interest is helping people manage the understandable emotions associated with a cancer diagnosis and the uncertainty that that brings. She completed a clinical PhD on anxiety in people with advanced disease and has published several papers on the subject. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you, everybody, for turning up for this talk today on managing anxiety. As Ellen already pointed out, just a few caveats before I begin. As she said, we're talking to a fairly wide general population of patients with different backgrounds and concerns and stages of treatment and so on. And this is also a very big topic. As you can imagine, anxiety is pretty prevalent amongst the cancer community. You know, almost everybody experiences some level of anxiety, and certainly the people that we see within the psychology department here, anxiety is the main presentation. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, oops, sorry, got to work out how to work out this laptop first of all. That when people are experiencing a lot of anxiety, there's often quick fixes that are suggested. You know, sort of don't worry about it, be in the moment, you know, all these sorts of quick fixes that can happen. And today I'm presenting to you only for about 40 minutes, so I don't want to be another one of those quick fixes. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that up front, that what I'm going to be talking about is an overview. Hopefully there's some ideas in here that are going to be helpful to you. It's a little bit of a sort of a little dive, a little look into what anxiety is, how it works, how psychologists can help people with anxiety. But if there's things specific that you'd like more support with, I'll give you information at the end also about some support services. So off we go. So anxiety is a common response to living with cancer. About 1 in 10 people actually have a level of anxiety that is clinically significant, meaning that it's really impacting on their life in a way that they would seek more support from a clinical psychologist. And about 1 in 3 people, so that's a lot, report moderate to severe symptoms of fear of cancer recurrence or fear of cancer progression. That's really impacting on their life as well. So that's another form of anxiety. And the most common sources of anxiety include fearing that the cancer will progress or come back, especially around the time of appointments and scans. It's a very difficult time for people. Even coming into the hospital can bring back memories and triggers. There can be pressure from family and friends that things need to return to normal, and that can put a lot of pressure and anxiety on people. And also people can be frightened to let go and feel positive in any way. They can be scared that they might jinx themselves. So they might, sort of remain in this very vigilant state. And of course, anxiety is normal whenever there's a stress. So within cancer, of course, there's realistic, ongoing, difficult stresses that people are trying to navigate and cope with, up to including fear of death and, where is this all going to end? So when we feel anxiety, it does actually serve an important function though. So anxiety is really there to help get us motivated to protect ourselves. So we very quickly will go into protector mode, into a future-orientated state where we're thinking about the future, what is going to happen, all the what ifs, how are we going to cope, is it potentially dangerous? And there's a focus very much on threats and danger and being prepared and trying to respond. And this is a protector mode that, we kind of need to be in. It gives us benefits to think and plan and be able to meet the challenges that come our way. But at the same time, it can flip over into being too strong. So sometimes when people in protector mode, they're also anticipating threats that aren't there, or they are too much in the future. They can be defensive and all sorts of, or aggressive, lots of things can happen in protector mode. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of a diagram that explains kind of a common way that anxiety can manifest for people. And psychologists like to understand cycles that people can be in so that we can intervene. Now, this is a general one, and as a psychologist, I would work with people individually and work out with them their particular cycle, but this is kind of like a general idea that often it starts off with a trigger. It can be something internal, like a body sensation, a symptom, or a thought that comes, a memory that can be quite intrusive. Also, there can be external triggers, so hearing health information, seeing something in the media, hearing about somebody else who's got cancer, and then the person has thoughts about that, and often thoughts about perceived threat. How does it impact on them? What does it mean for them? And understandably, then they can feel quite anxious. So there's a cascade then of other things that happen, like body symptoms. We all know what it feels like to be anxious. But also there can be interpretation about the anxiety itself. So when the person's feeling particularly anxious, then they can start to interpret, yes, I really am under a threat because I'm feeling this way. And nobody wants to feel anxious. It's a horrible state to be in. So, of course, people want to try and get rid of that feeling. So some of the ways that people might respond is by seeking reassurance from friends, from doctors, getting more information. They might start Googling and looking at places that aren't particularly helpful, focusing more on the body. They might be checking their body more often, and also avoiding reminders, because if this all started from a trigger, well, it makes sense. Let's avoid the triggers. So people might start to become more withdrawn or might cancel out of certain things. For instance, I don't know, having dinner with a friend, if they know that friend's going to bring up with them what's happening, how you're feeling, what's happening with your cancer, and haven't spoken to that person for a long time. So they might start to disengage from some of the things that are really important to them. But depending on what type of coping the person's doing, it can bring down the distress in the short term, but it might actually keep the distress going longer term. So it can start up a bit of a cycle. And if it brings down distress in the short term, for instance, by cancelling something or escaping from a feeling, then it's more likely that that will be reinforced, that way of coping, and so it can set up a bit of a cycle. Now, this is all happening for a person within a wider context. So what are their personal experiences? So that's kind of the first circle, the person themselves. What are they bringing to all of this? What do they know from the past? And what is their coping style? What's worked well for them in the past? And what are they likely to draw on again when the next stressor comes up? But also the bigger context, what's the environment around them? What is the social support? What is the relationship like with their treating team? Do they feel safe? Is there trust? All these things are really important, and they all feed into this cycle as well. So as I said, psychologists work with people to understand their particular cycle and to try and address all these different areas through how they calm themselves, their thinking, their ways of coping, and their broader context as well, how those things could all be improved and worked on. So how people respond can be helpful or not, and even the same type of coping can be helpful or not in different circumstances. So it's about flexible coping and seeing what's best for each situation. So often it's helpful to, what I do with people is kind of ask them questions like, where does it lead you? Working out with them, is it driven by emotion or is it more of a considered response? Because the urge to get rid of a feeling can be so strong that it can drive, I guess, the next thing that we do. But in the short term, it might be helpful, but in the longer term, not. And it might not be considered. So it's about responding rather than reacting. Sometimes it's important to be able to self-regulate a little bit and take some time to react to a trigger that might happen. And also, is my response aligned with my values and longer term goals? So that example of having dinner with a friend, if my values are relationships and connection with other people, how is my ways of coping and avoiding anxiety getting in the way of that? And I work with people on trying to build up their confidence about some of those situations. And is it maintaining the distress in some way? So when people get really anxious, there's, when the trigger happens, we have an autonomic nervous system response, which is immediate. The nervous system reacts and immediately we get this response. So the anxiety goes up pretty fast, pretty quickly for most people. And there's often a fear around where is that going to lead and is that going to keep going? And so we work with people to see their curve and what happens with their anxiety and getting confidence to let the wave of anxiety pass over. Now, obviously, this is very individual and it can be very graded, meaning, you don't sort of jump in the deep end, but working with people to see what things can they do that is difficult for them in some way. Somebody's just watching the window outside for people online. So it's difficult for them in some way, but it's, say, a 3 out of 10, a 4 out of 10, where they're facing a challenge, but they're able to overcome it and they feel quite confident about doing it. But it does get a response. And then afterwards they can see, okay, I was able to get through this. This is what I did to regulate myself. And then the next time when I do that, is it a little bit easier? And over time, does it actually mean that the intensity of the anxiety decreases and the duration isn't as long? It's also about having a different relationship with the anxiety itself. So sometimes learning how to ride the wave, so to speak, and let the anxiety occur and pass is in itself a really important learning tool. Because often what we do is we spend a lot of time and energy trying to get rid of the feeling, and then the person gets very bound up in that whole experience, and all the energy goes into that. And so seeing how the feelings dissipate by themselves over time can be really important. But the urge to escape or do something to get rid of the feeling can be really, really strong. So it's very individual trying to work that out. So one analogy that I've heard, which I really like, is the idea of when we're feeling anxious, what we're telling ourselves about that anxiety itself is really important. We call this metacognitions. So metacognitions are thoughts about thoughts. So I'm having an experience, I'm having a thought. What am I telling myself about that thought? So our thoughts can become like logs, if you like. We throw them into the fire. So there's already some big emotion happening, some big stressful situation that is realistic and very difficult. And then thoughts come in such as, can I handle this? Is this going to get worse? What's going to happen next? And so sometimes standing back a little bit and letting that energy of that big emotion burn out to some extent or have its own energy to pass, and observing and standing back can be the best thing that we can do in the short term, and giving some time to regulate, to then come back and deal with the situation itself. So managing the anxiety, I think, starts very much with acknowledgement of it and really validation, compassion, and normalisation around the feelings that a person's having. You might have had the experience yourself where you've got something really difficult going on and you tell a friend about it and they say to you, oh, it's okay, or, oh, well, at least you're here. I've had people say that somebody said that to them, all sorts of really unhelpful things. And what the friend is often trying to do, their intention is to try and help. They're trying to make you feel better. They're trying to fix it in some way. They're probably finding the level of distress also distressing and they don't know what to do with it. So they're trying to make it better. But often we do that to ourselves as well. So when we're having a very strong emotion, we might say to ourselves, get over it, just get on with it, it's not that bad. And we don't validate ourselves. And then what happens next is it doesn't really help at all. So that first step of taking the time to think about, how can I comfort myself a little bit? How can I think about what I would say to a friend? Often we can do it for somebody else and it's much, much harder to do it for ourselves. And sometimes it is necessary to do that with somebody else as well, before we move on and kind of try and work through what to do next. And then thinking about, well, how do we cope? What are the main ways of coping? And I've drawn here on some Rothbard and others from, it sort of goes back to the 70s really, about the idea of control and how we try to cope. So primary control is the first things that we try and do when we've got a very stressful situation. So it's the kind of fix-it mode. It's when we're trying to plan, problem solve, set some goals, change the situation in some way. Think about health behaviours, what's realistic, what can be done to improve those. If people have low energy, how can they pace their activity? And also looking at how we're talking to ourselves. So this primary control is in some way trying to change what can be changed, like the old adage. And it can be very helpful if it's the right fit for the current circumstances. But it can very easily flip into ruminating, worrying, going round and round, trying to find an answer, trying to find solutions. And it can also be extra things that people are doing rather than helpful health behaviours. There's kind of over-checking or over surveillance of their body, those sorts of things. And again, this is very understandable. We all do this. Everybody can relate. I always see lots of nods with this idea of ruminating and worrying and flipping over into this kind of more unhelpful way of coping. So what's the alternative? And this is often where people find it very difficult to think about other ways of coping. So secondary, go backwards. So secondary control is where we actually look at our response and our own emotional regulation and how we're coping with our emotions. So as I said before, the acknowledging, validating, normalising, the idea of riding the wave, so having a different relationship with feelings, sometimes letting them pass and not getting caught up in the urges to do the things that often come next. So the urge to escape, the urge to avoid something or do something that we're going to regret later on in terms of coping that brings down the distress in the short term. Approaching the avoided activities in a graded way, so working out, what's going on for this particular person and what might be helpful. Reframing thoughts and improving the next moment. So often grounding in the present. So when we're feeling quite activated, we're very much in the future. So coming back to the present, using the senses. What can I see right now? Where am I? What can I feel? What does it feel like to have my feet on the floor? Often, it's why dentists have fish, in the waiting room. They have something to look at. What's 5 things I can see around me? What can I hear if I'm at home? Would I like to listen to something that's going to ground me in the moment? How can I tend to my physical needs? How can I self-soothe? These are all ways of coping that we often think about really as almost resignation. Like if I do this thing, I'm not engaging with the problem. But what I want to suggest here is that actually when we extend our coping repertoire to include these types of things, it is still very active coping because the person's made a decision around what is the best fit for me in this moment. I can engage with the problem, I can try and work it through, or I can say now is not the right moment because it's 3 a.m. or because I'm sitting with a friend having lunch and intrusions come in, thoughts come in about something, or because today I'm not really in the best state for this, I'm not really going to have good perspective, or perhaps I want to talk to somebody else about this and get another perspective with somebody else, and that's not going to happen for a few days, or I'm not going to see the doctor, I'm concerned about something for another week. So this idea about putting a boundary around, which is the big black line, and then moving into this mode of coping is still active, and thinking about it that way because it's actually about the intention with which it's done. Choosing one's attitude to the situation. How can I think about what's happening right now? What are my values? How can I put them into play in this situation? Engaging with things that are meaningful in a paced way, in a way that's possible. For instance, if somebody's not feeling very well and connection is very important value to them, they might not feel well enough to go and see a friend, but a short phone call or text might be possible. So connecting with the values that are really important and expressing those. But sometimes people have unhelpful ways of trying to control those emotions. So they're trying to deal with them by avoiding them, as I said, numbing or distracting or suppressing. And all people use these ways of coping at different times. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. But as I said, this exercise of kind of trying to consider primary or secondary control, thinking about what mode are you in at a given time, and would it be helpful to shift, for instance, from the ruminating into secondary control. And again, I said this this is very brief, right? If I'm doing this with a client, we'd spend quite a few sessions on working on all of these different skills. So, as I said, the intention is really important. So somebody could say, I've got this thought, it's worrying me, I want to get rid of it, I'm feeling really anxious, I'm going to keep really busy. What I'll do is I'll distract myself and I'll keep really busy. Or they could say, no, I've got this thought. Oh, yeah, it's really tough. They acknowledge it, they validate it, and they say, okay, is there anything I can do about this right now? Do I want to engage with it? Or no, at this moment, I think I need to let it be for a bit, but I'd like to go and do something that's going to help soothe me a little bit or give me some pleasure for the day. I might go for a walk. So to the outside, it looks the same. Here's two people going for a walk, right? But the first person is running away from something. And you could argue the second person is actually running towards something. They're running towards the things that they find important, that they want to do with the rest of that day. And really, most of the time, no matter where we are in our life, we're really doing the secondary control stuff most of the time. So even when a person is kind of in the middle of being anxious as well, they might be moment by moment, not letting their brain get too far away from them, trying to work through each thing as it comes up. So the beach ball analogy, I think, is a nice one that some of my clients have resonated with, and it's this idea that if we have lots of things on our mind and put it all into a beach ball and go down to the water and try and like shove it under the water and get rid of it, we're struggling with it, right? We're trying to really kind of take it away. But when we let go, what happens is it pops up again. So then what does the person often do? They'll struggle again. They'll spend all that time again. So it keeps them locked in that cycle. And so the alternative is to let go and look around. You know, where are they right now? They're at the beach. Would it be possible to have a go at having a swim or sitting on the water's edge and having a look at the water and listening to the waves and again engaging all the senses? If they go for a swim, for instance, they might see the beach ball. It's still popping around. It's still there, like it's still bobbing around. And they might again get hooked back into going back to it. But it's expecting, yes, it's still bobbing around. Or they might even swim straight into it. But it's the idea of, okay, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to try and be flexible and think about, can I put it down? Can I pick it up? That protector person self that's part of us, right, that we need to honour. We have to honour that part. So honouring that part and saying, I am looking after you. But actually, I'm looking after you in a different way. What you're wanting from me is to stay engaged with it all the time. But how about if I try a different way? And I'm going to, having a swim, being present is also a way of protecting you. And I'm going to have a go at doing that. I know none of this is easy, but that's an idea to have a think about. So how am I going for time? Because I feel like I might. Great. So how do we know if the primary or the secondary control would be the best fit? You know, should we process a concern? Because it's not, again, about ignoring stuff. It's there, it needs to be worked through. So the times when it's useful to process, I'll just run through this quickly. The slides will be available for you after the session as well. But, you know, I think most of us could come up with this checklist ourselves, right? It's focused on a problem that has a reasonable probability of being relevant. The issue could lead to a problem if it's not examined. Most people would agree there's something constructive that could be done. Focusing on the issue leads to some sort of problem solving. And working through the issue helps the person to process difficult emotions. So sometimes when I work through with people on stuff that can't be changed, sometimes just that process of working through, thinking about it can really be helpful, because it's about connecting with other human beings. It's about, those big questions in life that sometimes we don't have answers for. And often it would lead to a feeling of motivation, a sense of control. But if the thoughts are focused on the what ifs, it can become very unproductive. That being said, people will come to me with what ifs and we work on them. It's not like you say, well, then I mustn't think about it. But in the moment, if there's a what if and it becomes another what if and it becomes another what if, and it feels like it's just snowballing, well, that's a time to think, can I disengage from this for a bit and bring it somewhere later? It's not about saying I mustn't be thinking this way or I shouldn't be thinking this way. It's about validating and understanding it, but trying to work through it at another time when it's going to be more productive and useful. And if there's nothing that can be done about the issue in the moment, so at 3 a.m, for instance. So a huge source of anxiety for people too is that finding the balance. How do I get it right? The protector self wants to monitor and make sure that everything's okay, but it can very easily flip into over-monitoring. If a new symptom comes, it's very frightening. What does this mean? Immediately, everybody will think, is this the cancer coming back or has this progressed? And of course, it's important to not put the head in the sand, right? But also not be excessive in terms of needing reassurance and seeing the doctors. And it's very hard to get this right. And a lot of this is about trust as well, right? So the protector part will be on high alert until it can be reassured and listened to. When we have concerns, we've got a symptom or something that we're worrying about, it has to be listened to. Otherwise, we're just going to come back and say, it's still there. Hello, that feedback is really, really important. And also the balance between, lifestyle, how much to be healthy, but how that can flip also into quite rigid types of lifestyle that can actually maintain anxiety as well. And also being informed, how much, it's very individual. People want to know about their diagnosis and treatment, their health in general, and finding a balance between finding out more information, but then people very easily can go into sort of rabbit holes trying to reassure themselves with information that then just sends them down sort of further and further. It's very tricky. So I really have questions for you to answer this rather than answers. To think about, is what I'm doing here, my health, behaviour, my checking, my whatever it might be, is it driven by a desire to get rid of an emotion? Or is it centred and considered? So that part of us, that's the self, I like to call it the wise mind. When we can activate that part of us, when we're feeling calm, considered, centred, what we might say to a friend, what a trusted guide might tell us, what would that be more likely telling us to do? What's the objective advice? Are the sources of information that I'm seeking, are they good sources of information? Am I kind of bringing down my anxiety? Like with reassurance, sometimes it'll bring down anxiety for half an hour, but then it flips into the next thing. But what about this? Did they really understand what I said? It can become a bit of a snowball. We all need reassurance. There's nothing wrong with reassurance, but it's looking at the cycles that people might find themselves in. And is my way of trying to cope impacting on engagement with my valued activities? If my, for instance, diet is very rigid, is it meaning that I'm not able to go out and enjoy dinner at a restaurant with other people? Or if I have a glass of wine or half a glass of wine, am I worrying about it for 5 days later? Those sorts of things. And how do you feel when you can't maintain that standard that you've set for yourself? So having obviously guidelines around plans for surveillance is really important. This is really about the treating team, having a good relationship with them. And this is very much a two-way street. As healthcare professionals on the other side, we have a big responsibility to be able to listen to our patients, to be able to really align with them and work with them so that they feel that there's a good plan, they know what's happening. But also, other health-related things. Are there other health checks that I should be doing for my age? People will sometimes focus only on the main cancer concern and neglect some of the other issues that are going on in their health. And also having a bit of a coping plan. Waiting for appointments is very difficult, waiting for scan results. If a person does have a symptom that's popped up, they might have to wait a few days to see their GP. How are they going to cope in the meantime? So sometimes thinking about having a bit of a repertoire of things that you can go to, that you use, that you find most helpful, what's been helpful in the past that you can draw on. Because when we're in that moment of intense anxiety, it's hard to think of those things. So the cancer, I won't go through all these, but the Cancer Council does have a list of when to respond to physical symptoms, and this can be a good guide as well. And I guess from this whole exercise, I was hoping sort of that you might ponder some of these questions. So how is my way of coping impacting on the activities that I value? How can I reassure my protector part and connect with my wise mind, the centered part that can be my helpful guide? What way of coping is the best fit for me in the current situation I find myself in? And when am I likely to experience anxiety? What are my particular triggers? And is there a different way of responding that I might like to practice or try or experiment with based on some of the ideas that I've given you today? So here's some possible resources. The Cancer Council in Australia and cancer.org, I'm sure you all know about in America, have some good booklets on emotional health. These are a few books. Toni Lindsay, the first one, actually worked with at RPA. She's got a book on the Cancer Companion. She's worked mostly with adolescents and young adults. And Linda Carlson, I went to one of her presentations and workshops, must have been 10 years ago. She's also very good. Megan McGowan, I don't know, but I've heard this is also a good book, Free from Fear, Living Well After Cancer. And I've also listed some of the references and resources that I've drawn on, a couple of my own papers, Rothbaum's work, and the 3 websites at the bottom are styles of therapy, different types of therapy that I integrate into my work. Metacognitive therapy, which looks at how we think about our thinking, and it's how we cope, how we get caught up in trying to get rid of emotions. The One Life is about acceptance and commitment therapy, which you might have heard about. And the last one is interpersonal family systems, which talks about the different parts of us. Protector mode, healthy adult. We all have lots and lots of different parts, and understanding how they kind of work together is a style of therapy that I think is very useful. And some possible support options as well. So here at the Kinghorn, as I said, we have a psychology service. You can talk to your team about a referral. Unfortunately, we do have quite a wait list. At the moment, it's probably about 8 weeks, which I know is not ideal. The Cancer Council has also information and support. They do some online or phone counselling. Mummy's Wish for mums with young children. Cancer Hub for families and children. And then there's 2 search for psychology features. So sometimes we'll see people where the issues are about the cancer, but there's kind of longer term issues as well that they might want help with. And there's a carer gateway, which is useful for carers. So thank you for listening so intently. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. In relation to the log, so the thinking about the thinking, are there 2 types of thinking about the thinking? One that's unhelpful thinking about, and one that's helpful thinking about the thinking?
Yes, absolutely. So I guess as psychologists, we always get caught in the unhelpful stuff, right? So I really appreciate your question because it's really important to also, I guess, amplify the helpful parts. And certainly when we're thinking about anxiety, for instance, I guess the normalisation is the helpful part of it, isn't it? So, of course, I'm anxious. Most people will be anxious in this circumstance. How can I let this pass without doing anything that I think I'm going to regret later? You know, those sorts of thinking. Absolutely, yes.
Anyone? Yeah.
When you're not the person with cancer, you are a friend,
Yes.
and you see how stressed and anxious they are when they have their 3 monthly checkups and everything. You pointed out before, we normally say, stop worrying about it or it'll be right. Wrong answer, I know. What should we do?
Yes. Look, it's very hard, right? Because even as a psychologist, when I have to sort of sit with people's distress a little bit, it's hard. And I have to tell myself sometimes, don't rush in. Like, there's this urge that we all have, especially when it's around anxiety, it's to speed things up. And it's actually the opposite that's needed. It's to slow things down. And that's very uncomfortable because we feel like we're almost torturing the person, right? We say to the person, not much, we're not saying much. We're even saying to them, well, yeah, it is hard. Like we might feel like we're going to inflame it for them. But what it does do is it helps the person to feel heard and understood, and it releases some emotional energy. And often what will happen is then the person can go, oh, okay, and they'll find their own answer. And it's very, very difficult as the person watching that to do it. But saying little things like, I know you can talk to me, I might not have any answers, but I could be next to you. Or beforehand, right? So preparing a little bit. If you know every 3 months, it's really tough. Having the conversation when things are a bit easier and saying, what would you like me to do in this time? Is there something that, what would be the best thing? Would it be to check in with you? Would it be to not say too much? Would it be to just be present? Would it be, so those types of things. But it is, I agree, it's very hard as a carer. And it's always with good intentions, nearly always. People want to try and help. But it can create this almost conflict sometimes. If you're not hearing me, this isn't what I want. Yeah.
Hi,
Hello.
I have heart failure. It's cardiac amyloidosis, and it's stage 3. Like prognosis, like 6 months. I mean, I turned 70 last Monday, but how can you say to yourself, I've got like 6 months, maximum 1 year,
Yeah.
and what do I do? And I have difficulty in where I'm staying. I just have a backlog of unpaid levies.
Okay.
I've lived there 30 years. I fully own my place, like mortgage free.
Mm.
And I'm forced into being a high interest loan. All this anxiety, and yet I'm dying. I mean, like, if they declare me bankrupt, I'm bankrupt. I mean, how can you cope with, like, I know I have that little amount of time.
Yeah. And I think that was my fear about presenting this, to be honest, because it's such a huge, huge thing, anxiety. And we're looking at this across a wide range of people. Not at all. And what you're saying is
Some support. Like, I it's like I have my friend through Lifeline people. I don't want to call them.
Mhm.
You know, what's the point?
Mhm.
I must have died now. But the most beautiful suburb said, I'm forced in this situation. What can I do?
Mhm. So, I mean, these are big questions. It's not something I can really answer in a few moments. But please, I really encourage you to talk with your team, reach out, find out what can be wrapped around you in terms of support. So there's psychology, there's us, our team, there's social work, and there's broader community supports as well that perhaps need to be in place. Mhm. Good, good.
I'm getting to a lawyer.
Okay. And when do you see your doctor here next? When are you involved with somebody here?
I'll see myself.
Good, good.
I'm getting told I'll see Thursday.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we will catch up after the talk and I can see if we can link you in with your care team.
Thank you. Okay.
Leah, we just have a couple of questions from online. What do you do when you get stressed dealing with attending so many medical appointments? For me, anger comes up when medical professionals don't communicate with one another.
Yes, and especially if the care is fragmented between different teams and even different hospitals, it can be very, very tricky for sure. Look, again, I think it's about trying to get the balance right. Almost anything that we do in life, it's thinking about where is the middle ground. So the protector mode, can get quite angry, right? Because it wants to look after you and it wants your needs met, and they're legitimate needs. But it's thinking about how can you do that in a way where you're able to communicate it so that it's in an assertive way. I work with people a lot about this, their communication with the treating team, how they get their needs met, how they assert their needs, how they talk with the team. And sometimes, it can be a real work to get those things done. So I'm afraid it's not an easy answer, but it's I guess a multi-prong approach. So how you as a person can work on how you communicate, but also behind the scenes. Sometimes I talk to teams. Sometimes I've gone with patients to sessions. Sometimes we get the care coordinators involved. And it's really trying to get people so we're all on the same page, we're all working together, rather than feeling like you've got somebody opposite you. Because as I said before, trust is really, really important.
Thanks. And then we've got another one. When chemo finishes and the amount of contact with medical support people reduces, maybe there should be a fact sheet given then to help people cope, as you have a feeling of being cast out to sea without your anchor, given the delays in people being about to get appointments with people like yourself. So
Yes.
very good feedback for us to take on board.
Yes, and that time of transition from really active treatment to surveillance is really, really difficult. It's a time when we get a lot of referrals. All that sort of security and regular appointments is all gone. Certainly providing a fact sheet is a good idea. And some of those resources that I directed you to before, the Cancer Council and so on, they do have some booklets on life after cancer or surveillance or, managing anxiety between treatments, those sorts of things you might find very helpful as well.
I'm just conscious of time. We just have a couple more minutes left. This was sent in when registered. So how do you know when anxiety is at a level that it would be useful to seek professional support?
Look, that's very individual, and sometimes we'll see people with some anxiety symptoms that might just need a couple of sessions just to kind of pop in and talk about what's going on for them and find their own ways of coping and maybe just tweak a few little things for them. Whereas other people might need more longer term. It's really about what you're finding in your own life. Is it really impinging on your well-being? Is it impacting on your engagement with the things that you value? Are other people telling you that they're finding that, you know, you seem anxious a lot of the time? So those types of things I think can be helpful to think about. And it's like sort of coming up to the scans, you know, everybody gets anxious to some level. Does it pass afterwards? Are you engaging with your treatment, or is it getting in the way of turning up for certain things? Is really important to consider.
Could just thank Leah again for presenting today. So as I mentioned at the start of this talk, we do have some dates locked in for the presentations for next year. So you can take a little photo. As Leah said, we'll send you through a copy of the slides. But our next one is from a presentation from the dietetics team, which has been very highly requested. So that is booked in for the 12th of February 2025. And then finally, as I mentioned, we would just really value any feedback that you've got for our talk and our session today. It does help us to figure out what it is that you're wanting from us in future, and also gives some feedback as to things that we can work on. So thank you everyone for taking the time out to attend today, both online and in person, and hopefully we will see you again in February.